Hello, this is Philip Carr-Gomm. Recently I was asked to present a book that I've been working on together with my colleagues Stephen Elcock and John Marchant called Time for Magic, which takes the wonderful artwork of Jamie Reid, the artist, and combines it with text where I talk about the eightfold wheel of the year, and in which Stephen and John discuss Jamie's life and contribution with his artwork. And in the talk in Watkins Bookshop in London, I dive straight in to talking about Jamie Reid's life. I hope you enjoy this.
Imagine you're born 1947, just two years after the Second World War. So the kind of echoes and reverberations of that are still around. And you're born for your sins in Croydon, which is, I apologise for anybody who lives in Croydon, it's a lovely place, I'm sure. But certainly in 1947, Croydon wasn't the greatest place to be because of suburbia. And Jamie found himself in a very kind of neat environment in suburbia. But strangely enough, despite the kind of rather stifling atmosphere of suburban Croydon in the late 40s and early 50s, he found himself in a very unusual family. And an analogy that came to me the other day in thinking about his life was the one from the Asterix cartoon, which a lot of people know about Druidry or perhaps have their first encounter with the Asterix stories. And in that, if you don't know it, there's the character Asterix, who isn't a druid himself. But as a young child, the story goes that he fell in the druid's cauldron. And the druid is this wonderful figure called Get-a-Fix in the English translations, and psychoanalytics in the French versions of the book. And he fell in the cauldron and was lifted out by his mother. But the result of that was that he had superpowers. He was fantastically strong and he could do all sorts of amazing things. So that's the kind of conceit of the story that runs through the Asterix books. And in a way, I think Jamie found himself in a cauldron. He dropped into this family, born into this family that for whom there was this influence of this man who had died just a year before he was born, called George Watson McGregor Reid. Now, it's said that he was his great uncle. Some people think he was his grandfather, but nobody really knows. And he was born, and he had this influence on Jamie's father, because Jamie's father's father had died early during the First World War, and so his great uncle had brought him up. So even if he wasn't a genetic grandfather, he kind of played the role of the grandfather in the family. And he was a very bombastic individual. In the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, we have an annual scholarship for a paper on a particular topic. And a chap called Adam Stout has written a wonderful one on George Watson McGregor Reid. You can find it online, and we publish it as well. And he goes through his life. And he was responsible for reviving really the Druid order in Britain towards the beginning of the 20th century, around about that sort of time. And 1909 was the first time he did a ceremony at Stonehenge, I believe. And the kindest way to describe him is as this word fabulist. He was a fabulist, which is a nicer way of talking about somebody who makes a lot of stuff up. And the trouble with people who make a lot of things up is it's really hard to separate the truth from the fantasy. So even his date of birth he used to give different dates at different times to different people, the location of his birth, different dates at different times. It's possible he was a serial bigamist. He was one of these larger-than-life characters who went over to America. He became interested in naturopathy, the nature cure movement. Went over to America and learnt naturopathy over there and got involved in the trades union movement. The interesting thing about him is that he was a socialist. And he was very much in favour of workers' rights. And he tried to organise the trade union movement. and he was eventually thrown out of America, and I don't think anybody quite knows the story behind that, but he had to leave in a hurry. And he ended up in England. He had this varied career. He got involved in the Order of the Golden Dawn. He started a Nature Cure magazine. Some people thought that he'd invented Sanatogen, that drink, but apparently not. But so he's one of those characters we don't really know. He bought some land near Blackboys in Sussex and set it up as a kind of nature cure place, a kind of well-being resort. But it was the Second World War scuppered that because it got taken over by the Canadian Air Force. On the family was strong. So Jamie found himself in a family that was very influenced by Druidry. There's the whole Druid stream of influence. Very influenced by socialism. Very influenced by pacifism. So members of the family were members of CND. So it was always a choice: do we go on a march or do we go to a Druid ceremony? And that was such a strong influence that his brother joined a select group of people who were called Spies for Peace. And his brother, this group, managed to infiltrate the secret network of command centres that the government had set up in the event of a nuclear war. And incredibly now, to believe that they managed to infiltrate it and take a whole load of photographs and grab some documents and get out without getting caught, and leaked it to the press, and it was published. And they were looking for him, and there's a suggestion that he would be tried for treason, but nobody could find him, the brother. The authorities in the end decided not to prosecute him, because rather wisely, I think they realised if they prosecuted him, then that would make it even more public and even more well known. That same little piece of history repeated itself with Jamie Reid when he produced his most famous piece of artwork, which was of Queen Elizabeth with the swastikas in her eyes and the nappy pin in her lip, which is probably the most well-known image that he created. People were so outraged and shocked by that there were calls for him to be tried for treason. So this is the soup that he was dunked in, the cauldron that he was dunked in. Hello. This was the cauldron that he was dunked in, and it had a strong influence on him. So when he was asked later in life, how would you describe yourself? He said, as a socialist Druid. The interesting thing about Druidism, it has this political strand in it. There was Yorma Ganug, there was a chap called William Price, who is responsible for the fact that we can cremate ourselves. William Price was a self-declared Druid in Wales, who was a doctor who practiced a lot of natural medicine, who had a son whom he named Jesus, and who unfortunately died when he was a baby. And he decided that since the Druids cremated people, so he thought that he would cremate his son. And the good citizens of Glamorgan, I think it was, saw a great fire on the hillside and went up and found Dr. Price burning his son and called the police. He was arrested, he was taken to court, and the judge made a judgment in his favour. And prior to that, cremation was illegal in the UK. So that was established by him. Morganug championed local rights and so on, and was attacked by the militia. And George Watson McGregor Reid continued in this tradition. And so when I entered the Druid, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, when I was young, Ross Nichols was a socialist. He was very much in favour of Major Douglas's plan for social credit. There was this movement of social credit, which was incredibly so advanced that they've never been able to do it, which was, he said, to get to the root of the problem, you had to completely revise the economy, to change the entire way money is handled and works. Of course, he's right. We know that. But, the job of doing it was just too big a job. Strangely enough, though, it had got a foothold in Canada. And there was a social credit movement and political candidates in Canada for some time. So my teacher, Ross Nichols, was very involved in that. And so that's an interesting theme to look at in terms of modern day Druidry. So this was the milieu that he was brought up in, and then he became an art student. He got involved in punk, and he met Malcolm McLaren, who went to the same art school as him. Malcolm McLaren was the manager of the Sex Pistols and a fashion designer, and that's when Jamie did the cover for Sex Pistols albums, and he created this type of art which was the black male cut up. The lettering that's cut up out of a newspaper like that, which you see everywhere now. It's copied everywhere like that. And so he did that. And in fact, a lot of Jamie's art, I mean, this book is a fantastic sort of collection of his art, because they've included his later work that illustrates the Eightfold Wheel of the Year. Very colourful pictures. But they also include his more political work as well, so you get a feel for it. In that early work, it feels like there's a lot of anger there. And when people ask me, what was he like? He must have been a pretty heavy character, pretty angry guy. He was the sweetest man in the world. We met him through probably, 15 years ago, something like that. First of all, I met his brother, the spy for peace, thanks to Adam Stout's his study, his work he was doing with us. Information about the early days of the Druid Order with his great uncle and so on. And then we met Jamie, who wanted to come and live in Lewes at one point, and he came and visited us and looked around the town and all the rest of it. And so we got to know him, and over the years, we always experienced him as a very, very sweet, gentle guy. But you look at some of the artwork, and there's a real raised fist in that. All the time, while there was this strand of his political work going on, right the way through to the present day. Last night I heard a story that I keep discovering stories about him. Last night we had a story about how Louis Vuitton offered him this incredible amount of money for taking his exhibition, which was 8 teepee installations, each one for one of the 8 festivals of the year. And it was in a room, and we went and saw it in Brighton. And then there was different artwork painted onto the teepee and different sort of stuff inside each teepee and all the rest of it. And they wanted to take it to, the Swiss Biennale or some big fancy art thing. And when Jamie learned that it was with Louis Vuitton, he absolutely refused. I don't know why. Maybe their track record isn't that great. But he didn't want to sell out. So all the way through, he resisted that. He didn't like the art world. He didn't like playing that game. There's a wonderful story. A few years prior to that, he had been asked by a big chain of Japanese department stores to have his artwork in their department store. And the piece of artwork they chose to blow up to enormous proportions was a one which had a text, because Jamie used to include a lot of text. You'll see it in the book, lots of text with some political messages. And it said, the only way we're going to sort things out is to destroy the capitalist system and, completely crush or smash the blah. And they said all the directors of this chain of department stores in Japan came, and it was stuck on the front window of their shop, and they all came to pay homage to the artist and bow, and then somebody read the text. And it was a disaster, but apparently Jamie enjoyed the sparks that flew after that. So that's his political work. Mixed in with that was his esoteric work, his spiritual work, if you like. And there's a quote I want to read you about that, because this provides a real key, I think. When he said, "I'm a socialist druid," he said, "In many ways, political change can only come through spiritual change. And I was brought up with that feeling," referring back to that childhood of the politics and the spirituality and the druidry at the same time. The two are intertwined. And that theme ran right the way through his life. And one of the really strong themes for him was nature and nature's turning year. even to the degree that he went up to Scotland to try crofting, to live up. I think it was on the Isle of Lewis. He went to the Isle of Lewis and tried crofting, and but he was summoned by Malcolm McLaren, back down to London to do some job for him. And but he had an allotment by the River Mersey. And when we were at the funeral, he wanted, he had the family, one part of the family wanted a Druid service, the others wanted a Christian service. We did both. So we had a Unitarian service and then a Druid burial service, looking out over the River Mersey, which, if you've ever looked, it's vast, it's huge river. And from where he was buried, you could see the allotment that he'd celebrated the festivals in himself. And so this was a strand of inspiration that came right the way from his childhood, right into his adult life. And at a certain stage, probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, he decided to paint a picture for every day of the year and to present it in 8 sections, one for, 2 for the solstices, 2 for the equinoxes, and the other. And so what these pictures were, he did them on postcards, postcard-size card, beautiful coloured pictures. And then he specially made, he had wallpaper, so this gallery around the corner was wallpapered with his artwork. And then there were 8 racks or boards or like that. And once it would say Imbolc, Beltane, Samhain, Lunar, Spring Equinox, and so on, like that. And then there was 365 divided by 8 is, we don't know, number of postcards on the display. And then what you could do, that you could choose one you liked. So I love that one. And then they would run it through a fine art printer and it would come up. So we've got one on our wall that's about this size. Absolutely beautiful. So, Stephen Elcock, when he was invited to produce, a book about his artwork, he thought, well, this is a great way to organise things. So you'll see that it's organised in 8 sections, one for each of the festivals, and they invited me to write the descriptions that go with each of the festivals. So in addition to that, what they did is, towards the end of his life, he engaged in a very interesting project where he brought together his, if you like, his political interests, his interest in Druidry, and his interest in the land and nature. That at Helligan in Cornwall, he was allowed to use a field, and he created this. They made a beautiful this symbol that Jamie was very fond of, which was the A for anarchy and the V for victory, and the circle for the wheel of the year and for Druidry and all those sort of spiritual concepts. And they made it in the earth, and then at each of the 8 festival times, there's been a celebration and a ceremony and a planting of seeds and so on. So at his funeral again, we had bags of wildflower seeds that had been planted on this magical sigil that was created on the ground that we spread in a park in Liverpool. So let me read to you. He had this quality. So when you met him, he was a gentle, loving, warm guy, very open and relaxed. You look at his political art, and there's this fire in it. You look at his nature art, these 365 pictures, and there's beauty. He's just so struck by the beauty of the world and the beauty of nature. There's this love of nature. And he was also a prankster and a trickster. So he, following maybe the inspiration of Abby Hoffman, who published a book that was called Steal This Book, he encouraged shoplifting, didn't he? He engaged in these extraordinary actions. Really, he did work for Extinction Rebellion, for Just Stop Oil, funnily enough, for Pussy Riot. Just Stop Oil. I say funnily enough because I don't know if you've heard, but yesterday they sprayed orange paint on one of the stones at Stonehenge, and I wonder what Jamie would have thought of that. Part of him, I think, would have been, yes, that's brought attention to this awful problem we're facing. Another part of him would treat the stones of Stonehenge with great reverence and would be furious about it. When we last saw him, the last time we saw him, just before he died, he was trying to decide whether to go ahead with an exhibition in Moscow to support Pussy Riot. And I was saying to him, Jamie, there's a war going on. You can't do an exhibition in Moscow. This is like, for all sorts of reasons you can't do it like that. But he said, well, I'm not going to go personally. So I said, oh, thank God for that. But it took place. They sent, basically got artwork out there, and they did it for Pussy Riot. So he was prepared to stand out on a limb. So he said that there's a picture he made, and that had writing underneath that said, Jesus was a black Arab bisexual gypsy socialist shaman educated by druids and Brahmins. Right? And then there's this black guy in the picture, and it's like, it's a great picture. And you read it and you think, oh, he's just being kind of wild and crazy. But if you analyze that text, you see, educated by druids and Brahmins. That means he knows about this extraordinary link between Druidism and Brahminism. There's this, basically Druidism draws on an Indo-European root. If you track it down, it explains so many similarities between Brahminism and Druidism. It's a very interesting, Orwin and Brinley Rees have written the definitive text on that and go into it in incredible detail. So that indicates he knows about that. So Jesus is a shaman educated by Druids and Brahmins. So he also knows about the story of Jesus coming with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea to Glastonbury, and the theory that he was educated by the Druids. There was somebody called Gordon Strachan who wrote a book about Jesus being educated by the Druids. And I remember having tea with him in Kew Gardens and saying to him, your theory will upset the Druids and the Christians, because his theory was that Jesus learned the power of human sacrifice from the Druids, because the book The Druid Prince had just been published, which suggested that this prince was sacrificed to save Ireland from the Roman invasion. And I said, anyway, so controversial theory, who knows, it might be true. But Jamie was clearly aware of the fact the idea of Jesus being educated by the Druids was an extraordinary possibility, because there was this tin trade between the Middle East and Glastonbury, in that area. He was a shaman, Well, the shamanic thing, Jamie used to say that when he did his art, he would go into a trance. He'd say, if his agent, John, would be talking to him and he was painting, in the end he'd say, look, I can't do it, I can't talk to you in pain, I'm in a trance, leave me alone. And he understood the power of changing consciousness, and of course the whole business of producing art by opening your consciousness to the divine is something that is right at the core of Druidry. The whole concept of Arwen, the flow of spirit. Jamie absolutely got that. And so we've got the term shamanism in there, and understanding that indigenous spirituality in these islands was shamanic, in the sense of people altered their consciousness particularly. Then we've got the socialist bit in there. We've got, it'll be harder for me to analyse the Arab bisexual gypsy, but anyway, there you go. It shows that he's having fun, he's being provocative, he's throwing up ideas, and he's an incredibly talented guy. So this gives you an idea of the range of what's presented in this book to you, and maybe if any of you wanted to, just anything that occurs to you, any questions or thoughts, do by all means.
Could you talk about the title, Time for Magic?
Time for Magic, yeah. Jamie had a number of catchphrases that he used, and in the poem that Tommy recited last night at Foyle's Bookshop, most of the lines of the poem were catchphrases of Jamie that you find in his artwork. And if you look through the artwork in that, you'll see one of his techniques, if you like, is to combine words with images. And Time for Magic was one of them. And it was coming out of his philosophy of the beauty of the world and the magic of the moment. And he would talk about, let's wake up and appreciate life and how wonderful life is. It's time for magic. And in his belief as well about how political change can only come through spiritual change. So it was this idea of, if you want revolution or you want political change, you have to do magic in some way. And then the subtitle of the book is A Shamanicist's Guide to the Wheel of the End. Shamaniki was another word that he liked, because he liked anarchy, the concept of anarchy, and then shamanism he liked as well. He put them together, and that, after all, if you think about it, is a kind of spiritual and a political whack together. Yeah.
Where his inspiration came from?
Yeah.
Came from which masters, which magicians, or which
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I think you missed the beginning part. I said how he was born into a family that was very strongly influenced by the old chief druid, George Watson McGregor Reid. And although McGregor Reid had died a year before he was born, he was one of these larger-than-life characters, and his influence kind of echoed through the family. So from a very early age, he was surrounded by a very politicized family and a very kind of spiritualized family, if you like, interested in spirituality and so on. He joined the Golden Dawn at some point before Aleister Crowley's time. The McGregor in his George Watson McGregor Reid's name was probably introduced by McGregor Mathers, who was in the Golden Dawn and so on. It's not sure that it was a genuine surname, as it were. It was added in. And there was a piece I wanted to read to you, but have a think if there's anything you want to ask. There was two. Maybe if I just read to you a couple of extracts which show this influence of this man, Watson McGregor Reid. Health reform, back to nature, natural health, and anti-vaccination movements, food reform, vegetarian and anti-vivisection movements, political reform, feminism, anarchism, socialism, religious reform, theosophy and mysticism, Celticism and anti-imperialism. All these were live issues then as now. They were the ideals of the counterculture, and George Watson McGregor Reid was in the thick of it. He was so in the thick of it that in the time that Italy invaded what we now think of as Libya, there was a group of people, there was an area called Senussi land in the western part of Libya that was resisting imperialism. Germany and Britain and France had started to carve up the Middle East and take control. And this was the last part of the sort of Middle East and towards the west and Sahara that hadn't been colonized. So the Italians thought, let's grab that bit. And they resisted. And the story goes that McGregor Reid and 11 members of the Druid Order went out there to defend it against the Italians and died there. And we're not entirely sure if it's true, but there's a likelihood that it is actually true. There are photographs of the headquarters of the Druid Order in Senussi land. So, a mystery, yeah. But you see all those movements, which of course are alive today as well, he was completely involved in. And that kind of anarchic, anti-establishment posture was in his great uncle, who was possibly his grandfather, who said, "The government is responsible for every evil which curses and blights the happiness of the country, destroys the happiest of homes, and brutalizes and degrades the people." So strong stuff, and he was grown up within this kind of environment. So what can I tell you about this book that can whet your appetite? How about I tell you about the core of the book? What happens with this book is you get some pages where Jamie's friend and gallerist and agent John Marchant introduces the life of Jamie, and in a few pages gives this overview of his life. Then he goes into a dialogue with Stephen Elcock, who is a wonderful curator of very unusual imagery, and magical imagery in particular. And they have a discussion about the themes that I've been talking about, Jamie's politics and his art. And then and you have a review of some of his early political work and images. And then we go into the core of the book, which is using the structure of the Eightfold Wheel of the Year to show you his art, but also to introduce you to the concept of the Eightfold Wheel. And if you think about many of you, just pop your hand up if you're familiar with the concept of the Eightfold Wheel of the Year, just so I understand. Right, okay, so over half, it's not a concept that's familiar to you. Okay, well, one of the ways of understanding Jamie and his artwork and his position was that he was opposed to the linear way of thinking, to the sort of march of progress and the goal-oriented utilitarian way in which our economy and business and society is focused on, which has led to such disasters in the environment, for instance, and in the wealth-poverty gap. He was opposed to that because he understood that there's another way of understanding the world. And currently there's a psychiatrist, Ian McGilchrist, who is doing some very interesting work on that. And if you have a look online, you'll find some really interesting presentations of his work. He talks about this. These two ways of thinking. There's another way. That tends to be a left brain way of operating, this linear brain. Very useful for goal achievement. Not useful, not helpful as a way of living your life. Because if you live your life guided in that way, basically the bottom line is you're here and down the end of the line is your death. And that's it. You're just going in a straight line. And, once a year you can head towards Christmas or towards your summer holiday. You've got a marker. Oh, I can't wait till my summer holiday. And then when that's over, oh, well, Christmas, we'll have a bit of a break. And so on. It's this linear way of thinking. But all indigenous spiritualities, certainly, have a completely different conception, which is life is cyclical and is much better understood in the round, as it were. Everything runs in circles. And of course, nature displays that to us all the time. And this way of thinking, when you translate it into the way you are living your life, you as an embodied soul, a being in a body, find yourself in a physical environment, the natural world where you happen to be living. And that's undergoing this change through time. And you're traveling through time, and your body is going through time as well. And this time, the interaction between time and space is profoundly informing your consciousness. And what happens is there's the passage of the seasons. There's vastly varying exposure to the light of the sun, which is affecting your hormonal system, which is affecting how you feel and how your body functions. So it's very, very basic. And although our modern life tries to reduce the impact of that by giving us air conditioning, and so we can come out of the box of our house into the box of the car and drive to the box of the office, look in the box and work on the box, then hop back home and watch a box to relax. And then open a box of cereal in the morning and start all over again. Although modern life conspires to keep us in these boxes and on these straight tracks, once you get out into nature and you really tune into what's happening, you see it's changing. And so the ancients knew of this, and Druidry is centered around this understanding. And the year is divided into the time of the longest light, which is now the summer solstice, is the longest day, maximum amount of life with light, with all that means for our bodies and so on in our minds. And then travelling around to the time of the equinox, which is where day and night are balanced, travelling around to the winter solstice, the time of the shortest amount of light, the longest night. And then you think, oh my God, is it going to go on forever? We're just going to get darker and darker and end up back in the womb of time. No, it's okay, because on the winter solstice, the sun starts to increase its light, and you travel around again. Then you've got the equinox again, the balance, come around to the summer solstice. And then interspersed between those astronomical festivals that you can find celebrated all over the world. You can find it in sort of Aztecs, all over in many different cultures, these celebrations of these times. You have festivals in between, which are sometimes called the fire festivals, the Celtic festivals, the cross-quarter days. So after the winter solstice, you have Imbolc, which in the Christianity just took these all over wholesale and built on them, which would say in the Christian tradition it's Candlemas, February the 1st, February the 2nd. And then you travel around, and between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, you have Beltane, May Day, the only one that the Christian church didn't take over, perhaps because it's associated with fertility and mating and so on. Around to Lunasa, after the summer solstice, Lunasa, which became Lammas in the Christian tradition, celebration of the harvest and so on, 1st of August, past the autumn equinox, and then round to Samhain, Halloween, the time where you honour the dead and where you start to really enter the dark half of the year. And a lot of Druid teaching is based on the richness in this model, because you start to drop down, you start to see all sorts of correspondences and connections. You wonder, why is the whole world of media and movies and all the rest of it obsessed with sex and death? Oh, Beltane, Samhain, this axis where we're born into the world through the power of sex, and then as a result we die on the other side. So the Beltane, Samhain axis. And then each axis actually has a tremendous amount to learn from and to gain by deepening one's understanding of it. And so gradually over the years, we've developed ceremonies to celebrate this. And Jamie would do pictures to celebrate this and create huge banners, which at some of our events in Glastonbury, he's kindly donated to us. And we've had these huge, colourful banners to celebrate these times as well. So that's the Wheel of the Year. And so what I tried to do in the book is to highlight some of the resonances, symbolism, ideas behind these festivals. And so there's a section on that. And then tracking along that, there's a little section from the Gardens of Heligan, that project that I mentioned in Cornwall, where they plant seeds and so on. So there's a little kind of vignette, a view of the Heligan celebrations. And that's the book. That's what you get. Just a last chance for anybody. Any question anybody had?
A quick thought.
Yes.
Is the artwork ever going to be presented in an exhibition?
It should indeed be. Occasionally there are exhibitions, and I think that John Marchant is working on a kind of retrospective of his work, and that would be great when that happens. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody.